Now that we've learned some vocabulary terms about angles, we can return to the Find the Missing Angle and Segment note sheet. For each of these four examples here, I will read the important information and then mark the diagram with you. Then I'll ask you to pause the video and try the problems to the side by yourself. When you're done, unpause the video and see how you did. It's okay if you get things wrong, just go ahead and correct yourself as you go. Let's start with the first one right here. In this diagram, the measure of angle SUT is 25 degrees. So I'll find angle SUT, there it is, and I will label it as being a 25-degree angle. Alright, from here, I'd like you to pause the video and try and answer questions 1 through 5. Please pause the video. The answers will be coming up in 3, 2. If you haven't paused the video yet, I really encourage you to. Mistakes are valuable, and actually trying the problems, even if you get them wrong, will help you learn a lot better than just copying down information. And since there's a video check next time, you should probably do that. Here are the answers now. Here we are. For number 1, I put that PUQ and QUR were complementary, because complementary means sums to 90 degrees, and these two angles, when put together, form a 90-degree angle, so they'll of course sum to 90 degrees. You could have also had SUT and QUR as an answer. For number 2, a pair of vertical angles, I had PUQ right here and SUT right here. Notice how they're across the vertex from each other, making them vertical angles. For 3, how to find the measure of angle PUQ? Well, I know that SUT is 25 degrees and that it is a vertical angle with PUQ. In the last video we talked about vertical angles are always congruent, so this will be also 25 degrees because they are vertical angles. For 4, the measure of QUR, well, we know that PUQ and QUR are complementary, meaning they add to 90 degrees. If PUQ is already 25, we can subtract 25 from 90 degrees and get 65 remaining degrees. So QUR is 65 degrees. And lastly, does QU bisect PUR? Well, no, it doesn't. Bisect means to cut in half, but directly in half, so the two remaining angles are congruent. If this was truly a bisector, it would cut this angle into a 45-degree angle and another 45-degree angle. That's not what happens here. It's 25 and 65. So, no, PUQ is not congruent to QUR, so it is not a bisector. On to the next example. The information given here is that the measure of angle LKM is 40 degrees. So here is LKM, and I'll mark that with 40 degrees. Then it says that KN bisects PKM. So here's KN, and it bisects angle PKM. Well, what does bisect mean? Well, it means it cuts the angle in half so that the two remaining angles are congruent. So I'm going to mark them like this to show those two angles will be congruent. I don't know how big they are yet. I don't know what their measure is, but once I figure out one of them, I'll know what the other one is, because they'll be exactly the same. Go ahead and try problems 6 through 10 on the side now. Pause the video. The answers will be up in 3, 2, 1. So, for 6, two supplementary angles. There's many answers for this, as long as they add up to 180 degrees, because supplementary means to sum to 180 degrees. So I put JKL, so that's this angle, and LKM, that's this angle right here. See how they form a straight angle right here? So they will be supplementary. For number 7, name two adjacent angles. There are many answers for this as well, as long as those two angles share a side. So one answer that I had was PKN, so this right here, and NKM right here. Notice how they share this ray right here, making them adjacent angles. Again, there are many other answers for this. 8. Name a point in the interior of PKM. Well, here's angle PKM right here, and the interior means anywhere inside that angle. Fortunately, there's only one answer in this diagram, and that's point N. For 9, find the measure of angle JKL. This gets a little tricky. So we already know that this is 40 degrees. What else can we figure out? Well, we know that this angle right here will also be 40 degrees because they're vertical angles. But that doesn't help us get to this angle we need right here, JKL. Well, remember from before, we said that JKL, our angle we're looking for, and LKM were supplementary, which means they added to 180 degrees. So if we take 40 and subtract it from 180, we can get the remaining 140 degrees. Again, because these two angles should sum to 180. and make a straight angle. Lastly, 10. Find the measure of angle PKN. This is a little tricky as well. We want to know how big this angle is, PKN, right here. We know that straight angles are 180 degrees, so these three angles put together will have to sum to 180 degrees. Since this one is already 40 degrees, we can subtract 40 from 180 and know that the remaining two angles must be 140 degrees. Another way to see that is to notice that JKL and this larger angle PKM here are vertical angles, and so they'll both have to be the same at 140. Since we know that KN bisects these two angles or cuts it into two congruent pieces, we can take 140 and divide it by 2 to know that these are each 70-degree angles. So the measure of angle PKN is 70 degrees. Hopefully you're starting to see that these kinds of problems are kind of like a puzzle or a game, where the rules of the game are these. This is the information we start with and we fill in the beginning. And how we play the game is we use these words like supplementary, adjacent. We look for these kinds of things in the diagram to try and logically fill in as many of these angles as we can. Now we're going to try the same exact kind of game, but this time with segments. In this third example, now we've got a segment and not an angle. I'll mark the diagram with you. They tell us that AD is 10. So from A to D, I'll make a little bracket. From here to here is going to be 10. Maybe it could be 10 centimeters, 10 meters, we're not quite sure, but 10. AB is 2. So from A to B, from here to here is 2. And from A to C, so from here to here is 5. So make a little bracket and fill that in. All right, see if you can use that information. Go ahead and answer questions 11, 12, and 13 by yourself. Pause the video now. The answers will be coming up in 3, 2, did you pause? Here are the answers. So for 11, BC equals 3. And how do I figure that out? Well, B to C is here, right there. I know that AB is 2, A to C is 5, so B to C is its remaining part. 5 minus 2 leaves me with 3. Find the measure of CD. Well, A to D is 10. A to C is 5, so again, the remaining part, 10 minus 5, is 5. Now, one thing you'll notice is that normally when we talk about segments, we use one line over the top. We talk about lines, we might put the two arrows over the top, but these don't have any arrows on the top, or any lines at all. So where to go? Well, whenever we're talking about measurements, such as, centimeters, inches, feet, any sort of number, we don't put the line on the top. So when there's no line on the top, it means we're dealing with a measurement. Lastly, 13. Is B the midpoint of AC? Let's check this out. So here's B, and here's AC, A all the way to C. A midpoint means that it is exactly in the middle of those two, so the two halves are congruent. Well, AB is 2 and BC is 3, so no, B is not exactly in the middle. It is not the midpoint. However, actually, what's interesting is that we do have a midpoint in this figure. C is the midpoint of A and D. Notice how A to C is 5 and C to D is 5, so C actually is the midpoint of AD. So not the midpoint that they asked us about, but there's still one in the picture. Let's move on to the next one. Again, this last example, I'll help you mark the diagram. M is the midpoint of LN. What does that mean? So M, right here, is the midpoint of LN. So that means that it is exactly in the middle of those 2 points. And that means that these two segments it splits must be congruent. So I'm going to put 2 marks here, and these means that those 2 segments, whatever they are congruent. They could both be 5, they could both be 10. We're not quite sure yet, but we'll just mark it so we know. NO is 3, so N to O is 3. So for 14, find the measure of MN. Well, here is MN, the distance from N to N. And this one's not too bad. We know that N to O was 3. We know that M to O was 7, that whole thing. So 7 minus 3 gives us the missing piece, MN. 7 minus 3 is 4. 15. Find the measure of LO. So L to O, this whole thing right here. This one's a little trickier. Well, I could do it, except I don't know how far it is from L to M, so that's kind of something I got to do first. Well, in the beginning they told me that M was the midpoint of LN, and from that I knew that the midpoint breaks LM, this half, and MN, this half, into 2 congruent segments. I know that mn is 4, so that must mean this part must also be 4. And L to N would be 8. So I've got LM, 4, MN, 4, NO is 3, so 4 plus 4 is 8, plus 3 is 11. This whole thing is 11 long, L all the way to O. There that is. And lastly, 16. Is N between M and O? Let's see, here's N, here's M, and here's O. Well, yes, it's between M and O, since N is on the line between M and O. Remember, if N was like up here, you might think it's still in between, but it wouldn't be, because between in geometry means on the same line in between. I hope this video has helped you learn how to find the missing angle and segment when you're given some information, and I hope that you've seen that's kind of like a puzzle or a game when we're doing these kinds of problems. Remember, if you need to know any other information, go back and rewind so you can rewatch it, or come see me during lunch, advisory, before or after school. Good luck, and be ready for the video check next class. Remember, you can use your notes.